Hi everyone, this is the first video for this course, which is in Chapter 1, Section 1 over problem solving strategies. So if you're at this video, I will have assumed that you have already read Section 1.1 in the book, either a physical textbook or the e-textbook on WebAssign. So if you have not read the first section, please go back and do that. So in these videos, I will assume that you have already read the section. So I may use some vocabulary that came from the section. So every week, the first step is to go read that section of the book. Okay, so this one talks about problem solving strategies. So there's a lot of strategies to solve problems in math. Some strategies are better suited for different types of problems, right? If you have a problem where it's really easy to draw a picture to visualize things, then that's the strategy you should use. If you have a problem that's all numbers, well, it's probably not the best to draw a picture in that case. So we're gonna go through 3 different problem solving strategies in this section. So at the beginning of this section, they talk about the 4-step approach to problem solving. So the first step is going to be to make sure you understand the problem. So in order to understand the problem, we need to know what information is given and what information do we need. So when we understand the problem, we know that we are given a certain amount of information and we need to find a certain amount of information to get the solution to the problem. So if you understand the problem, you know what's truly being asked, what information do we need? So once you understand the problem, you can devise a plan. So this is just picking your problem solving strategy. So are you going to look for a pattern? Are you going to make a table? Are you going to make a graph, draw a picture? Whatever it is, you pick your problem solving strategy that best goes with this problem once you understand it. So then comes the actual solving of the problem. So whenever you're solving your problem, you're going to monitor your plan and you're going to make sure you understand every step. So if we have this plan, we want to make sure that we understand every step and why we're doing every step. If you're ever solving a problem and you don't know what the next step, if you don't know why you're doing a step, well, that means that there's a problem. You didn't truly understand either this problem or the plan that you chose. And finally, we're going to look back over our work. So this just is make sure the answer makes sense. So if you're dealing, for example, with money, and you are saying you started with this amount of money, you spent this much during the day, how much do you have left? Well, if you get a negative answer, you know that you can't have negative dollars. So just make sure you go back and look at the answer in the context of the problem so that everything makes sense. So we're going to first understand the problem, use that understanding to devise a plan. And while we're solving the problem, we monitor the plan and make sure everything makes sense. And then lastly, once we have finished solving the problem, we look back and make sure that everything makes logical sense to us. So the 3 strategies in this section are looking for a pattern, making a table, and making a graph. So we're going to start with looking for a pattern. So if you have read section 1 like you were supposed to, this diagram should look really similar to the one on page 4, Pascal's triangle. So remember, if you haven't seen Pascal's triangle, go back and look at it. So remember, in Pascal's triangle, we had something very similar to this, but now we have that each row begins and ends with a 2 instead of a 1. So we know that each row begins and ends with a 2, so we can see that down these sides of the triangle, everything begins and ends, well, there's a 2 on those two sides. And now we know that each of the other numbers can be determined from the numbers in the row above. So we want to describe the pattern and use the pattern to find the next row. So let's look at, well, we know that there are 2's on the edges. So the first number that's not a 2 is this 4. So we're given there are 2's in the row above it, and we need to use those 2's to get that 4 down below. Well, just thinking about it, we know that 2 plus 2 is 4. And thinking about it some more, that's not the only relationship between 2 and 4. We also know that 2 times 2 is 4. Remember, Pascal triangles was adding, but we also see this relationship with multiply. So these are two options of what the pattern could be. Maybe it's adding, maybe it's multiplying, but let's go ahead and look at the next row. So the next value that we can look at is this 8 in the next row. So this number 8 is going to come from the 2 and the 4 and the 2 above it. So how do we get from 2 and 4 to get 8? Well, if you just sit and think about it for a minute, it's pretty clear that we can get that 2 times 4 equals 8, right? In this case, adding 2 and 4 only gives us 6. So we know that if we multiply, we get 8. So now this tells us that that pattern is probably multiplying. So let's go to the next row and see if this pattern continues. So the next row, we have a 16, 64, and 16 that come from a 2, an 8, an 8, and a 2 above it. So again, we know that 2 times 8 is 16. And if we check it in our inside rows, we know that 8 times 8 is 64. So it seems like we figured out the pattern. So let's describe it. So when we're describing these things, we want to make sure that we're using proper grammar. So I know this is a math class, but we're going to have proper grammar, capitalization, spelling, full sentences, all of that, right? All of you are training to be teachers, so we want to make sure that we're teaching our students good practices. So we are going to describe the pattern. So to get the values in the next row, we multiply the two numbers in the row above. So in order to get that 64, we looked right above the 64 and there were 2 8s, so we multiplied those numbers. Okay, so now we have described the pattern, and now we need to use it to find row 6. So row 6, so we know it's going to start with a 2 because we're given that each row of the triangle begins and ends with a 2. So we know it starts with a 2. Then we are going to take, let me clear this up here. We're going to take this 2 and the 16 and multiply them together. And we're going to get 32. 32, let me write that a little better. 32. Then we're going to take the 16 and the 64. So I can't do that in my head. I assume that you can't either. So we're just going to work it out over here on the side. So we have 64 times 16. So that's going to be 24, carry the 2. And then we just keep multiplying. So that's going to be 1024. Okay, so that's going to be our next number. And then again, we have 64 times 16. So it's 1024. And then 16 times 2 is 32, followed by 2. Okay, so this is the pattern. So to get the values in the next row, we multiply the two numbers in the row above that are above that position. And then we found the next row. So at this point, I wanted to mention that whenever you're doing work like this, because all of you are training to be teachers, we want to make sure that everything we write is really clear, right? So we have that this up here is some scratch work, this over here is some scratch work, but it's all very legible. Just so if you were explaining this in front of a class of students, like I am, no matter if you're doing it virtually or in person, you just want to make sure that everything you're writing is very clear and readable, which is why you can see it sometimes I go up and erase what I've written just to make sure that it's readable. Okay, so this is the end of the first page of the worksheet for section 1.1. So in order to make these videos just a little bit shorter for you, I'm just going to do one side of a page at a time, so that way you don't have to sit through watching an hour-long lecture. I'm just going to break it up into shorter videos for you. So that's all for this one.